June 19th, 1994, Pensacola, Florida. I'm holding a glass of whiskey, the ice half melted into a pale amber pool. On the television, they're broadcasting the 50th anniversary of the D-Day landings. The old Army boys are weeping on Omaha Beach. I respect them. God is my witness, I truly respect them. But when you tear your eyes away from the gloomy coastline of Europe and cast them to the other side of the globe, toward the bottomless deep blue of the Pacific, you find a different kind of war. There were no trenches there, no forests, not even dirt. There was only the endless blue, and upon it, the greatest collision of steel in human history. People call it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Sounds like a casual country hunting trip, doesn't it? Historians will give you the cold, hard numbers, 19-1. We lost 33 planes. The Japanese lost 480. Statistics turn that battle into a joke, a lopsided slaughter. But for those of us strapped into the cockpits, it wasn't about numbers. It was the searing sun of June 1944. It was the 120-degree heat inside the cockpit and the sting of sweat streaming into your eyes. It was watching those once-invincible Zero fighters explode into blinding fireballs right in front of you. It was the hoarse screaming of brothers over the radio, and it was the desperate, hollow terror that set in when night fell, the fuel gauge read empty, and you stared down at a pitch-black ocean. I was there. I was a cog in the machine of Task Force 58, flying the deadliest killing machine ever forged by the Grumman Ironworks, the F6F Hellcat. I followed Alexander Vratsu as he charged into the enemy flock, witnessing the myth he created in 8 minutes. I flew under the command of David McCampbell, weaving a net of death above the clouds. I'm old now. My memory comes and goes, like the tide. But before I forget it all, I have to tell this story. About the battle that redefined air warfare, and about the night we survived only because Admiral Mitcher gave the order to turn on the lights. Flashback. May 28, 1944, Majuro Atoll, Task Force 58 Assembly Area. If you want to understand what we did in the Marianas, you first have to understand our mount. That afternoon, I stood on the flight deck of the USS Essex CV-9, running my hand over my warbird, a brand new Grumman F6F Hellcat. She bore the number 38, her fuselage painted in navy glossy sea blue shimmering under the equatorial sun. For a fighter pilot, loving your plane is the first rule of survival. In the early days of the war, we flew the F4F Wildcat against the Japanese Zero. Those were bitter days. The Zero was light, agile, and could turn on a dime like a ballet dancer. And our Wildcats? Heavy, sluggish. We only survived by using the thatch weave, a tactic invented by Jimmy Thatch. But the F6F changed everything. It was Grumman's answer, designed specifically to hunt Zeros. I climbed onto the wing and stepped into the cockpit. This was my office. Compared to the cramped quarters of a Zero, the Hellcat was as spacious as a luxury sedan. As I settled in, Harry, a veteran crew chief we called Grease Trap, climbed up to help me with the harness. "Sir, this beast is hungry," Harry said, patting the nose of the plane. That was the soul of the machine. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp radial engine, 18 cylinders, 2,200 horsepower. What does that mean? It means the pure aesthetic of violence. When you shoved the throttle forward and the water injection kicked in, the roar of that engine could rattle your bones. It gave us speed the Zero couldn't match, over 380 miles per hour, and a terrifying rate of climb. More importantly, it gave us survivability. I knocked on the steel plate behind the seat. This was a luxury the Japanese didn't have. Armor. We had heavy plating behind our backs and bulletproof glass in front of our faces. The airframe was structurally obscure in its toughness. We used to joke that Grumman built planes out of the same steel used for bridges. Remember the Coral Sea? My wingman, a red-headed kid from Texas named Billy Red Sterling, walked over. He was always chewing a stick of gum. Back then, if a 0 got on your 6, you might as well start writing your will. It's different now, I said, pointing to the gun ports on the wings. Now it's our turn to chew them up. 6.50 caliber Browning M2 heavy machine guns, 400 rounds per gun. When we squeezed the trigger, those 6 guns spewed enough firepower to saw a large tree in half in 2 seconds. Add to that the self-sealing fuel tanks the Japanese dreamed of having. Even if hit, the rubber lining would expand to plug the hole, preventing a fire. This is why we were confident. The Japanese Zeros might still turn faster than us, but in the sky of 1944, speed and firepower were king. We didn't need to dogfight them. We just had to use the altitude advantage the R-2800 gave us to dive, fire, and pull up. Boom and zoom. If the 0 was a sharp but brittle katana, the Hellcat was a heavy, hardened sledgehammer that would smash both the sword and the hand holding it. By then, Majuro Atoll was packed with warships. As far as the eye could see, it was a sea of gray steel. Task Force 58, the largest naval force the planet had ever seen. 15 aircraft carriers, 7 battleships, 21 cruisers, 69 destroyers. We had over 900 carrier-based aircraft. And our opponent, Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's first mobile fleet, was watching us from the shadows. The intelligence officer told us in the briefing room that our targets were the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, Guam. Take those, and our B-29 bombers could bomb Tokyo directly. What does this mean, gentlemen? Our CAG commander, Air Group, the legendary Lieutenant Commander David McCampbell, stood before the map, that trademark cigar in his hand. It means the Japanese Navy has to come out and fight. They can't afford to lose the Marianas. This is their absolute national defense sphere. If they dare to poke their heads out, we break their backs. His eyes were sharp as a hawk's. Those were the eyes of a hunter. June 15th, 1944, Philippine Sea, west of Saipan, the landings began. Although I was in the sky, I could feel the island burning below. The giant guns of the battleships were thundering like an angry Thor. Our mission was to fly combat air patrol, SAP, for the landing forces and sweep the Japanese airfields on the island. But these few days were too quiet, unsettlingly quiet. We circled over Saipan, encountering nothing but the occasional land-based Japanese plane flitting by like a startled fly, quickly swatted down. No organized, large-scale resistance. Where is Ozawa? That was the question on everyone's lips. The main strength of the Imperial Japanese Navy, Taiho, Shokaku, Zuikaku, these names haunted us like ghosts. We knew they were close. It's like waiting for the other boot to drop, Billy mumbled in the wardroom, poking at his Spam. The atmosphere was oppressive, yet mixed with a high-octane excitement. Compared to our predecessors early in the war, our batch of pilots was lucky. We had the best gear and the best training. I have to mention our training system. In the States, pilots like me were mostly college-educated before flight school. We logged 300 to 400 hours of flight time back home. We practiced landings on training carriers in the Great Lakes until it was muscle memory. We practiced deflection shooting in Florida until we could calculate the lead on a moving target with our eyes closed. According to Intel, the quality of the Japanese pilots was falling off a cliff. The attrition at Midway and Guadalcanal had drained the blood of Japanese naval aviation. Now, the guys sitting in those Zeros were often rookies with barely a few dozen hours of flight time. They're just kids, McCampbell once told me privately, but that doesn't mean you show them mercy. Up there, it's you or them. Giving those kids a quick end is the greatest kindness. Late night, June 18th. The news finally broke. Our submarines had picked up the trail of the Japanese fleet. Ozawa had finally shown himself. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commander of the 5th Fleet, made a cautious decision. He ordered Task Force 58 to stay near Saipan to protect the beachhead, rather than sailing out to seek a decisive battle. This decision sparked controversy among the pilots. "Are we just going to sit here and wait to get hit?" someone complained. But Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher, that old man in the baseball cap who always stared at the sky, knew what we were waiting for. The Japanese planes had a longer range than ours. A Zero without a drop tank could fly further than a Hellcat. Their strategy was outranging, taking off outside our strike radius to launch a preemptive strike. "Let them come," I wrote in my diary. "Our radar is ready." We didn't know it then, but this would be the moment radar technology shone brightest in naval history. June 19th, 1944, 10 a.m., over Task Force 58, codename, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. It was the sound that shoots adrenaline straight into your heart, the klaxon. "All fighter pilots, man your planes. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." The ship's intercom was barely audible over the thundering of boots. I grabbed my flight helmet and sprinted to the flight deck. A wave of heat hit me. The gale whipped up by the propellers nearly knocked me over. The deck crew had already fired up number 38. The R-2800 was idling with a guttural rumble, blue flame spitting from the exhaust stacks. I jumped onto the wing and slid into the cockpit. "Good luck, Mr. Reynolds. Bring down a few Japs," Harry yelled, helping me lock the canopy. The signal officer waved the checkered flag. I released the brakes and slammed the throttle forward. The massive thrust pinned me to the seat back. The deck of the Essex blurred beneath my wheels. Stick back. Wheels up. I was airborne. As we climbed to 20,000 feet and formed up over the fleet, the voice of the Combat Information Center, CIC controller came over the radio, terrifyingly calm. "This is Aspen, CIC call sign, radar contact, bearing 260, range 150 miles, large bogey. Repeat, large bogey. 150 miles. Our radar had picked them up at that distance. It felt like cheating. Ozawa thought he was launching a surprise attack, but every move he made was under our microscope. This was the famous Raid 1. "It looks like a whole beehive." Billy's voice crackled in my headset, trembling slightly. "Jesus, look at the numbers." I looked toward the western horizon. Through the gaps in the cumulus clouds, countless black dots appeared, dense, blotting out the sun. It was the last cream of the Imperial Japanese Navy and their final gamble. 300? 400? No one had time to count. "This is Red Leader, McCampbell. All units, drop tanks, prepare to engage, maintain altitude advantage. Remember, no dogfighting, keep your energy." At the command, hundreds of drop tanks released from the bellies of the F6Fs, falling toward the sea like silver rain. The plane instantly felt lighter, like a beast breaking its chains. We were at 25,000 feet, looking down on the prey that had no idea they were already dead. What happened next completely overturned my understanding of war. I locked onto a Zero on the left flank. I learned later it was a Model 52. It looked like it wanted to climb to intercept me, but its movements were sluggish, stiff, soulless. If this were 1942, that pilot would have pulled an Immelman turn to get on my tail before I entered range. But this guy, he just flew straight, maintaining a shallow climb. "Meat on the table," I muttered to myself. I pushed the nose down, the airspeed indicator spiking to 400 knots. The wind screamed outside the canopy. My gun sight reticle settled firmly over the Zero. Range 800 yards, 600 yards, 400 yards. Now, I squeezed the trigger. Rat, tat, 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 tat. 6M. Two heavy machine guns roared in unison, the airframe vibrating violently. 6 whips of fire lashed out, converging on the wing root of the Zero. There was no miracle, no dogfight. In that instant, the fragile fighter was crushed as if by an invisible giant hand. Its right wing sheared off, and the fuel tanks, lacking self-sealing protection, detonated instantly. Boom! A massive orange fireball bloomed in the sky. I yanked the stick back, pulling the Hellcat through the burning debris. Shrapnel pinged off the armor plate on my belly like hail on a tin roof. It was too easy. So easy it felt unreal. But this was just the beginning. The entire sky was boiling. This wasn't a battle. It was a unilateral execution. Burning Japanese planes were everywhere. Our Hellcats used altitude and speed to slash into the enemy formation again and again, cutting them apart, then pulling up with ease. The rookie Japanese pilots panicked completely. I watched 2 Jill torpedo bombers collide in midair, trying to dodge a single F6F. I saw a Judy dive bomber turned into a sieve by my squad mate before its bombardier could even release his load. "I got one! Tom, I got one too!" Billy's cheer nearly deafened me. "Stay focused, Billy! Watch your 6!" I roared back. But in reality, very few enemies could threaten our 6 o'clock. Our radar guidance was too precise. We always positioned ourselves out of the sun, attacking from their blind spots. In the midst of this chaotic airspace, I witnessed the birth of a legend. If I was a supporting actor in this drama, Alexander Vraciu was the undisputed lead. Vraciu was from the Lexington, CV-16. He was a natural-born killer with a stoic face and a calmness that sent shivers down your spine. That day, I had the privilege of being near enough to see his performance. His plane had issues. I learned later his supercharger was acting up, and oil was spraying onto his windshield, obscuring his vision. Anyone else would have turned back, but not Vraciu. He stayed. He charged straight into a group of Judy dive bombers trying to sneak through to the fleet. I watched his Hellcat, callsign Gadget, slice into that bomber formation like a sheepdog hitting a flock. He didn't make any fancy moves. He just controlled his throttle and stick with surgical precision, closing in on the enemy. First one. He closed to less than 200 yards. Short burst. The Judy immediately caught fire and fell. He didn't waste a second celebrating, didn't even bank hard, just micro-adjusted his heading and lined up the next one. Second one. Same distance, same short burst. Explosion. I was stunned. It wasn't just shooting, it was surgery. He completely ignored the rear gunners of the enemy planes. He had eyes only for the kill. Third one. Fourth one. In 8 minutes, literally just 8 minutes, right before my eyes and countless others, he shot down 6 dive bombers in a row. He was protecting the fleet, clearing the threat with a terrifying efficiency bordering on madness. That bomber squadron was dismantled by one man before they even saw the silhouette of the American fleet. When he ran low on ammo, he made a gesture that everyone would remember forever. He flew over the fleet, rocking his wings to signal landing. I heard later from the deck crew that when Vraciu climbed out of the cockpit amidst the cheers, he faced the cameras on the island and slowly held up 6 fingers. That photo made the front page of every newspaper. He wore a smile that was both exhausted and wild, the smile of a victor, the embodiment of the Hellcat spirit. On the other side of the sky, my commander, David McCampbell, was writing his own epic. McCampbell wasn't just a marksman, he was a maestro. He wasn't just fighting, he was conducting the entire Air Group 15. Drive them left. Blue flight, cut off those stragglers trying to flank. His voice was clear and powerful over the radio, as if playing a real-time strategy game. That day, McCampbell was credited with 7 kills, though records sometimes conflate this with his later 9 kills at Lady Gulf. On that day, he truly ruled the sky. He was like the Grim Reaper swinging a scythe, tirelessly harvesting souls. While we partied at 20,000 feet, history was being rewritten in the depths below. I heard about it later in the intelligence room, nursing a cup of coffee. We all knew Ozawa's flagship was the Taiho. It was the newest armored carrier of the Empire, touted as unsinkable. Its flight deck was heavily armored, theoretically capable of withstanding a direct hit from a 500-pound bomb. But it couldn't withstand our submarine brothers, specifically the USS Albacore. Old Jack, the intel officer, told us with a mysterious look, "Hey boys, guess what? The Taiho is done." "Done? We didn't see it sink," Billy asked. "That's the irony." Old Jack puffed on a cigarette. "The Albacore only put one torpedo into her. Shouldn't have killed her. But the Japanese damage control was catastrophically stupid. The torpedo cracked the Avgas lines. To clear the fumes, the damage control officer ordered the ship's ventilation system to be turned on full blast." We looked at each other, unable to believe our ears. Open the ventilation? Wouldn't that pump volatile, high-explosive gas into every corner of the ship? Exactly. Old Jack blew a smoke ring, like a giant bomb. All it took was one spark. Boom. We could imagine the scene. The giant ship wasn't sunk by the torpedo. It was blown apart from the inside out. Its armored flight deck was heaved upward, its keel snapped. With that explosion, Ozawa was forced to transfer to a cruiser. Almost simultaneously, another veteran carrier, the Shokaku, a veteran of the Pearl Harbor attack, was sent to the bottom by the USS Kavala. 3 torpedoes, clean and efficient. The day wasn't even over, and the Japanese Navy had lost 2 fleet carriers and the vast majority of its carrier aircraft. We had won so thoroughly that it felt surreal. When I landed that evening, the crew counted the bullet holes in my plane, only 2. Insignificant scratches from 7.7mm machine guns. I had 3 confirmed kills. Billy had 2. The total report for the task force was staggering. We lost a few dozen planes but shot down nearly 400. As the sun set, the blood-red light reflected off the calm sea. Floating there were countless oil slicks and debris, the graveyard of Japanese naval aviation. But the war didn't end there. The real test, the one of life and death, the test of humanity, would come the next day at twilight on June 20th, because we hadn't found the rest of the Japanese fleet yet, and Admiral Mitcher, as I knew him, would never let a wounded tiger escape. June 20th, 1944. The joy of victory didn't last long, replaced by a suffocating anxiety. If you beat your opponent into a pulp in the boxing ring, but the bell rings and he slips back to his corner, you never feel settled. We knew the backbone of the Japanese fleet was broken, but Ozawa was running northwest with what was left. All morning and most of the afternoon, we waited. The air in the ready room was thick enough to cut. Pilots played cards, polished their already gleaming goggles, or just stared at the clock on the wall. Admiral Spruance was being extremely cautious. He didn't want the fleet to stray too far from the cover of Saipan. It made sense, but to us pilots hungry to end the war, it felt like letting the enemy off the hook. Finally, late in the afternoon, a scout plane sent a delayed message. Japanese fleet spotted. But the bad news followed immediately. They were 275 miles away. The briefing room exploded. 275 miles? That was the absolute ragged edge of the combat radius for the F6F and SB-2C dive bombers. And it was already 3:40 p.m. Anyone with a brain could do the math. We would fly to the limit of our fuel, drop our bombs, and then try to fly home in pitch darkness with empty tanks. Was this a suicide mission? When Commander McCampbell walked in, his face was as dark as a storm front. He didn't waste words, just tapped the coordinates on the chalkboard hard. "Gentlemen, Admiral Mitcher has given the order. Launch 'em." His gaze swept over every one of us. I know what you're thinking. It's a long way, and it's getting dark. But this might be our last chance to destroy the Japanese carrier force completely. If we let them go today, they'll repair those ships and come back to kill our Marine brothers in a few months. The room was dead silent, save for the hum of the ventilation fans. Adjust your mixture, fly the most fuel-efficient profile. McCampbell paused, his voice dropping a notch. If you can't make it back, the fleet will send every destroyer to fish you out. Now, mount up. Walking to the deck, I glanced at Billy. The kid usually talked a mile a minute, but now his lips were pressed tight, a muscle in his jaw twitching. I patted his shoulder, saying nothing. Any words of comfort would have sounded hollow. The wind on the deck was stronger than yesterday. As I climbed into number 38, I looked at the fuel gauge compulsively, full, but it still didn't look like enough. The signal flag dropped. I pushed the throttle, released the brakes. The R2800 roared again, but to my ears it sounded less wild and more tragic. I launched off the deck, flying toward the setting sun. It was 4 p.m. on June 20th. Task Force 58 had released all its Falcons, 216 planes, to chase a ghost at the edge of the world. The flight was monotonous, especially for a long-range strike. To save every drop of fuel, we leaned the engine mixture out as far as possible and kept the RPMs low. It made the usually roaring Hellcat docile and quiet, a silence that set my nerves on edge. The sun began to dip lower. The Pacific twilight was heartbreakingly beautiful. The sky shifted from azure to violet, then to deep indigo. The clouds were rimmed with a blood-red gold, as if God was foreshadowing the slaughter to come. If you weren't going to kill people or die yourself, it would have been a perfect sightseeing flight. 2 hours passed. The radio was silent, save for static. I watched the fuel needle drift left, a stone forming in my stomach. We had passed the point of no return. If we turned back now, maybe we could land safely. But no one turned back. Suddenly, the leader's voice crackled in my ear. Visual contact, 11 o'clock. I squinted through the propeller arc. Where the sea met the sky, white wakes appeared, scars carved into the dark blue silk of the ocean by ships moving at high speed. The first mobile fleet. Even in retreat, the fleet looked massive. Several carriers, surrounded by destroyers and cruisers, were sprinting west. They saw us too. The sea surface blossomed with black puffs of smoke, heavy flak barrages. Attack formation, fighters suppress flak, bombers, get the carriers. In that moment, all worry vanished. I became the cold-blooded hunter again. I slammed the throttle forward, pushed the mixture to rich, and the engine let out its long-awaited roar. We were facing something called Type 3 shells, Sanshiki Dan. The Japanese stuffed these incendiary shrapnel shells into their battleship main guns to fire at us. Giant, multicolored fireworks appeared in the sky, lethal fireworks. I dove with the Avenger torpedo bombers. My job wasn't to drop bombs, but to use my 6 guns to strafe the enemy decks, suppressing their AA gunners so my bomber brothers could shove a bomb down their smokestacks. Below me, a massive carrier was making violent S-turns. It was the Zuikaku. That damn ship always had the devil's own luck, but I saw bombs exploding near her, geysers of water obscuring half her hull. Further out, another carrier, a converted merchant hull called the Hio, wasn't so lucky. I watched 2 TBF Avengers from the below wood bracket her. A torpedo slammed precisely into her starboard side. Immediately after, several SB-2C Helldivers swooped down like vultures. Bombs pierced the flight deck. There was no earth-shattering detonation, but the wound was fatal. The Hio began to list rapidly, fires erupting on deck. In the dim light, the flames were blindingly bright. I pulled up, banking hard, and strafed a destroyer trying to fire at me. Bullets sparked off its superstructure. "Take that!" I shouted internally, but the thrill only lasted minutes. As we pulled up and regrouped, the real horror descended. The sun was gone. Night, June 20th. If the battle was the first circle of hell, the flight home was the bottom. The fight lasted less than 20 minutes. It was now 7 p.m., pitch black. We were over the open ocean, nearly 300 miles from the carriers, and my fuel gauge was kissing the red line. The radio, once filled with combat commands, was now filled with unnerving silence and occasional whispers. "Red Dog 3 here. My low fuel light is on. Blue Flight, I can't see lead. Where am I?" The fear was primal. Humans aren't nocturnal creatures, and certainly not aquatic ones. In the inky night sky, losing visual reference creates terrifying spatial disorientation. Sometimes you can't tell where the sea ends and the sky begins. If not for the glowing radium of the instruments, I would have thought I was already dead, floating in the void. How do we get back? The fleet was under strict blackout. In the dark, hundreds of warships were invisible ghosts. If we didn't find them, or if we drifted just a few degrees off course, we would run dry and fall into the cold, shark-infested deep. I pulled the throttle back to the bare minimum to stay airborne. The prop lazily churned the air. I started talking to my plane. "Hold on, old girl. Don't you drop me here." I patted the dash. "Get me home, and I'll feed you the best high-octane gas." Time dragged. An hour felt like a century. Some planes ran dry. I heard the pilot's final calls, then long silence. I knew they were ditching in the dark. With luck, they'd make it to a raft. Without it, despair washed over me. I didn't have 20 minutes of fuel left, and radar showed the fleet was still 50 miles out. Just as I was preparing to unbuckle and ditch, a miracle happened on the pitch-black sea. Truly, I can only describe it as a miracle. In that moment, Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher made the most unorthodox, yet most human decision in naval history. He stood on the flag bridge, watching the green blips representing his boys disappear one by one from the radar. He knew what we were going through up there. He said a sentence to his chief of staff that would be written into history. "Turn on the lights." It violated every tactical regulation in the book. It exposed the entire fleet to lurking Japanese submarines, lighting a torch in a dark jungle and telling every predator, "Here I am." But in that moment, Mitcher didn't care. He cared about us. First, a searchlight beam stabbed straight up, the flagship's signal. A sword of light splitting the heavy curtain of night, reaching for the stars. Then, the miracle spread. One by one, every carrier switched on their deck lights and navigation lights. Every destroyer, every cruiser turned on their searchlights, even firing star shells. In an instant, the dead black Philippine Sea turned into a brilliant, floating city of light. In my cockpit, looking down at that sea of light, tears burst from my eyes. Not a metaphor. Hot tears actually rolled down my cheeks, salty and mixed with the taste of sweat. It was the road home. "That's the Essex. I see her," Billy screamed over the radio, his voice cracking. But that was just the start. Next came 2 hours of chaotic landings. We called it the nighttime circus. All landing procedures went out the window. No one cared what squadron you were, or even what ship you belonged to. If you saw a lit deck, you put it down. The sky was crowded. Planes couldn't even enter the pattern. Some ran out of fuel while waiting in the queue, pilots bailing out right next to the ships. Destroyers zipped through the formation like busy sheepdogs, fishing men out of the water. I aimed for the Essex. My engine was coughing, the sign of a dry tank. "Number 38, on approach." I couldn't see the LSO, landing signal officer, but I saw the deck lights. Those 2 rows of lights were the most beautiful lines I had ever seen. Just then, the SB-2C Helldiver ahead of me slammed onto the deck. Its gear collapsed, the fuselage grinding out a shower of sparks before hooking a wire. Normally, I would wave off, but I couldn't. A wave off meant burning fuel, and I had none. If I pulled up, I'd be swimming. The deck crew on the Essex showed incredible discipline. They didn't wait for a tractor. Dozens of men rushed out, physically pushing the multi-ton bomber to the edge of the deck and shoving it straight into the ocean just to clear the runway for me. Deck clear! I pushed the nose down. The engine flamed out completely at the last second. The prop stopped turning. I was dead sticking it in. Wham! The landing gear slammed into the wood, the shockwave rattling my teeth. Then came the violent yank of the tailhook catching the wire. My body was thrown forward, the harness bruising my ribs. But I stopped. I slumped in the cockpit, gasping for air. Around me was a cacophony of voices, sirens, and crashing waves. Someone climbed onto the wing and cracked my canopy. "Mr. Reynolds, you're alive!" It was Harry. His face was smeared with grease, but under the searchlight, his smile was prettier than an angel's. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't work. Finally, Harry and two other sailors dragged me out like a sack of potatoes. I knelt on the deck, kissing the rough wood, smelling the oil and burnt rubber. That night, we lost about 80 aircraft. Most weren't shot down, but lost to fuel starvation or landing accidents. But it was a mercy. Because of that light, hundreds of pilots like me survived. Epilogue: the next morning, when the sun rose again, the sea was calm. I stood on the island superstructure, looking down at the flight deck. It was a potluck. The Essex was parked full of planes from different carriers. Hellcats from the Hornet, Helldivers from the Yorktown, even an Avenger from the light carrier Princeton. And on other carriers, surely, our planes were parked. It was like waking up on someone else's couch after a wild party. Though the losses were heavy and the night had been a nightmare, when we tallied the score, we knew it was over. Japanese naval aviation as a strategic striking force had been erased. Ozawa took home nothing but a few empty hulls. Those 400-plus shot-down planes represented the last of Japan's skilled pilots. They were never coming back. From that day on, the skies over the Marianas belonged to us. From that day on, B-29 bombers could launch from these waters and rain thousands of tons of bombs on the Japanese homeland. From that day on, the road to Tokyo was wide open. A few days later, we got some R&R. I sat at a temporary camp on Saipan, looking out at the still smoking battlefield. I thought of Vratziu holding up those 6 fingers. I thought of McCampbell shouting over the radio. I thought of Admiral Mitcher's searchlight stabbing the heavens. The war wasn't over. Ahead lay Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Those would be bloodier meat grinders. But I knew the turning point had passed. That steel storm in June 1944, the battle called the Turkey Shoot, didn't just break the wings of the empire. It forged the soul of American naval aviation. Return to present. The ice in the glass has melted completely. The whiskey is just pale water now. I set the glass down and look at my grandson on the lawn. He's playing with a plastic model plane, an F6F Hellcat. "Grandpa, was this plane tough?" He runs over to ask. I look at the toy, and I can almost see the glint of aluminum skin, hear the roar of the R2800 engine. "Yes, kid." I rub his head, my voice a little raspy. "It was the best. It brought us home." People analyze the Battle of the Philippine Sea and talk a lot of big theories. They say it was a technological victory. That's true. The F6F Hellcat was vastly superior to the Zero. Our armor saved pilots, our heavy guns shredded the enemy, our radar gave us the eyes of God. It wasn't just machine against machine. It was industrial civilization against industrial civilization. America's powerhouse could churn out top-tier fighters like sausages, while Japan was patching things together in a workshop. They also say it was a systemic victory. That's true too. We built a rotation system, sending aces like Vratsu back home to teach, passing experience to the next generation. The Japanese treated their aces like disposable ammunition, use them until they die. By the Marianas, we were effectively fighting children who hadn't even learned formation flying. But as a witness, I say it was a victory of humanity. It was because of commanders like Admiral Mitcher, who dared to break the rules and light up the ocean to save his men. It was because of countless deck crews like Harry, pushing millions of dollars of aircraft into the sea just to clear a landing spot for a buddy. It was because every single one of us believed that we weren't just killing, we were fighting to end the killing. History books will remember the cold numbers, 19-1. But I will remember the burning nights, the falling meteors, and the light that turned on in the abyss of despair. I am Thomas Anvil Reynolds, former pilot of Fighter Squadron 15. This is my story. This is the glory and the dream of our time. If I were to write a few final words in my memoir about the meaning of this battle, I'd write this. The Battle of the Philippine Sea was the epitaph for the transition from the era of big guns to the era of aviation, and the longest, final nail in the coffin of the Imperial Japanese Navy. Before this, the Japanese still fantasized about a decisive battle to turn the tide, like in the Russo-Japanese War. They bet their last chips on the first mobile fleet. But the fighting on June 19th and 20th ruthlessly crushed that fantasy. To lose air superiority meant losing everything. Once we took the Marianas, the Japanese homeland was directly under the gun. This led to the fall of the Tojo cabinet and forced the Japanese military onto a darker, irrational path, the kamikaze. Because they had no normal planes or pilots left, they had to use human flesh as bombs. For the history of warfare, this battle proved that the carrier task force was the new master of the oceans. It demonstrated the terrifying destructive power unleashed when a nation's industrial might, technological level, and human training are perfectly combined. That is the story of the Hellcat. That is the legend of Task Force 58.